Hello and most welcome to 1769 of the series. We will continue today where we left off in 1768 of Warren D. Goldfarb, I Want You to Bring Me a Slab. We are slowly coming into the zest of it, of the very kernel of this rather complex article, but pointing to an immensely important subject. And Wittgenstein took up that he cannot find any introspectable features of mental life to support a localization in using it in contrast of a particular act, like contrasting the words. And I will read the last paragraph that I read in 1768 once more, because it's of high importance. Wittgenstein then points out that we say we use the sentence in contrast because our language contains the variance. It is, of course, a truism that we could not use a sentence in contrast to others if the others were not available. Wittgenstein means more, however. To say one uses the sentence in contrast to the variance is to say no more than that the language contains these variants. And when one utters the given sentence, one is not uttering the variance. The whole content of our talk of using a sentence in contrast lies in the availability of alternatives in our language. There's no particular act which is the using in contrast except for the utterance of the sentence itself. it might be objected that we do have a richer notion of using a sentence in contrast to others. That is, when I have thought about whether to write quite talented rather than very talented in a letter of recommendation. Exactly so, but in specific settings like these, we have the particular facts that anchor the using in contrast. The act of choosing is visible. There are specific alternatives and questions like, when does it happen, are answerable. The interlocutor's notion is not like this. He is talking of using the sentence in contrast as a general phenomenon. As always occurring, with the contrast class including all the possible variants. And then there are no facts that could ground a notion of a particular sort of act. Nothing is being added to the description. I said these words and I meant them. Thus, the interlocutor may be charged with illicitly importing features that emerge in special contexts into an overly general notion. However, the diagnosis may be taken further. Wittgenstein claims that in general no more is going on than that I said the sentence and meant it, though I could have said any of those other sentences but didn't. one wants to object that more must be going on. For the fact that I could have said those sentences but didn't bespeaks something. The notion of using in contrast gives what lies behind my saying this sentence and not those others. There must be something behind my utterances to explain why I make them rather than others that are available to me. I must in some way be constantly weighing, checking, and selecting my words, just as I do consciously when I write letters of recommendation. Either acts of picking or something like picking, but not exactly picking, go on all the time, or else I am not speaking, I am only moving. The Wittgensteinian response to all this would be to scrutinize both the picture of rational language use at work here, that including the picture of rationality it embodies, and the felt need for explanations of our utterances. Why, after all, isn't my meaning, what I say, explanation enough? What is to be secured by demanding something further. Is there anything in the end that would satisfy these demands? Questions like these surface frequently in the investigations, for Wittgenstein sees the desire for explanation as operating powerfully, pervasively, and misleadingly in philosophy. With regard to paragraph 20, however, we need only to say that desire is operating prematurely. To rely on unexplored presuppositions about the nature of rational language use is to assume far too much about the subjects that we are supposed to be investigating from the ground up. Once again, then, Wittgenstein has tried to show that what we all agree to concerning meaning does not by itself support the idea that what I mean picks out a privileged sentence. A sentence whose internal features will explain how my utterance does its job. When we recognize this, it is no longer dangerous to speak of a sentences being elliptical. Such talk does not commit us to thinking that the sentence leaves something out that I supply by meaning it. Slab is elliptical for bring me a slab, because they mean the same and the former is shorter. the feeling that the former leaves something out arises from the fact that, given the whole of our language, certain forms, like the latter, can be taken as paradigmatic. Forms, for example, that can forestall unclarities in a wide enough range of circumstances, or forms that simply are familiar enough and used frequently enough. As the occurrences of enough indicate, there are no absolutely paradigmatic forms. Ellipticality does not point to any notion of the complete content of our words, that which may go beyond the words as uttered, and which those words in some ultimate way express. In short, that two sentences have the same sense does not imply that there is a privileged way of expressing that sense. Indeed, in the last paragraph of paragraph 20, Wittgenstein puts off a request for just such a privileged verbal expression, with the observation that what it comes to for two expressions to have the same sense is that they have the same use. It might be objected that this is false, and that indeed no two sentences have exactly the same use, since there will inevitably be some occasion where one would employ one but not the other. The reply to this is not simply that Wittgenstein means more or less the same use. To ascribe sameness of sense to two sentences is to say that they have features of their application in common. What features might be essential to the ascription is not given beforehand, for that depends on our aims in the classification, on the reasons we are talking, in the particular context of sense at all. Indeed, I would argue that there is no general notion of use, and I would claim that Wittgenstein agrees. For such reasons, I do not read his notorious definition of meaning as use in paragraph 43 as a definition or explanatory, or as suggesting a use-based theory of meaning. This reading is closely connected with taking Wittgenstein not to be a behaviorist. It should be clear that he is not. Then little can be made of talk of use simplicity. Given that invoking use by itself carries little information, I take his remark in paragraph 43 to be, by and large, a denial of the possibility and appropriateness of theorizing about meaning. In sum, Wittgenstein is concerned in paragraphs 19 to 20 with ways in which philosophical questions about meaning can arise. His point may perhaps be summarized by a remark from Zettel, paragraph 16. The mistake is to say that there is anything that meaning something consists in. Yet of course he is hardly denying that we can and do mean sentences in various ways. Rather, he is trying to get us to resist the impulse to localize meaning something in a specific act or event. Admittedly, it is not easy matter to pin down precisely what the denial of the status to meaning something amounts to. Partly, Wittgenstein is urging that the answer to a question how a sentence is meant depends on no one thing or few things in particular, but rather on a variety of features of the utterance and the utterer. And on the circumstances in which the question is asked. More important, Wittgenstein is denying that the notion of meaning something supports certain conceptions of language. And in particular, that it supports the idea that there is the thing that is meant, which would be the content or relatum to the act. In taking meaning amiss, Wittgenstein charges we illicitly use the ways we have of talking about the surface level of mental life in talking of notions like meaning, wanting, understanding. He's pointing to the lack of introspectable phenomena of the appropriate sorts is a way to show that an unwarranted step has been taken. It is this step, rather than any specifically mentalistic theory, that he wishes to undercut. To use his term of art, it is the question of grammar of crucial notions like meaning. Given certain misunderstanding of that grammar, a naive philosopher might attempt a mentalistic account. But reactions to mentalism seeks only to replace one explanans with another. And hence rely on the same presuppositions about the explanandum. Indeed, the move Wittgenstein discerns, here as elsewhere, is not tied to any developed philosophical view. Rather, it is made on the way into philosophizing. Once it is made, there will be questions that philosophers will begin to debate, notions that philosophers will begin to refine. Wittgenstein wishes to snap such debates off before they begin by showing that at the start we have misread the fact. He is indicating the groundlessness of our insistence that these facts expressed in commonplaces we all agree to point inevitably to the notions that are the subject of philosophical debate. As we've seen, he does this by constantly challenging the ways we might want to exploit the commonplaces. By themselves, the commonplaces are perfectly unobjectionable. That is why Wittgenstein can claim in paragraph 305 that he is not denying anything. Yet every time we try to make something of them, it turns out that the jump has been made. We have already assumed a special interpretation of the commonplaces. This raises the question of where the insistence that the facts must be so read comes from. The question in turn can serve to uncover unexamined preconceptions. Proto-pictures are thought as animating language, are what explanation of meaning must rest on, of the nature of rational language use, etc. His point then is that these preconceptions affect what we take as data. We read the commonplaces through philosophically tinted spectacles. Of course, such proto-pictures are powerful and cannot be simply dismissed. In a sense, the opening sections of the investigations set an agenda. To substantiate the charge that philosophers groundlessly misconstrue the commonplace, Wittgenstein must go on to investigate further aspects of what he sees as the fuel for such misconstruals. It is the subtle and interwoven nature of these factors that makes the investigations appear to proceed crisscross in every direction. The opening section of the investigations, though, have the crucial role of bringing to light that there is something to be examined in this level. What makes it possible for philosophizing even to begin is a decisive move that is ordinarily unrecognized, very natural, and hard to conceive of avoiding. Wittgenstein is trying to expose the distance between how we take matters when we first start philosophizing and what we really have to go on. It is not easy to recognize this, and it may be far more difficult to accept the pictureless views of things that such a recognition entails. And here in this paper we have a clear indication that construing a picture of how language works is the start of the philosophizing tendency. That's exactly the spot where it all commences. It cannot commence before that. We would like, so to speak, to understand how language works. What is its general purpose? And we look for connections, and all of a sudden there is a picture established. An example there is most definitely the Saussurean idea of sign and signified. It's not the rule itself that is problematic, but the general picture, so to speak. Let me repeat, because it needs repeating. It's a tough nut to crack. Once again then, Wittgenstein has tried to show that what we all agree to concerning meaning does not itself support the idea that what I mean picks out a privileged sentence, a sentence whose internal features will explain how my utterance does its job. When we recognize this, it is no longer dangerous to speak of sentences being elliptical. Slab is not translatable to a larger sentence. Such talk does not commit us to thinking that the sentence leaves something out that I supply by meaning it. Slab is elliptical for bring me a slab because they mean the same and the former is shorter. Nothing more than that. Feeling that the former leaves something out arises from the fact that, given the whole of our language, certain forms, like the latter, can be taken as, and listen now, paradigmatic. Ellipticality does not point to any notion of the complete content of our words, that which may go beyond the words as uttered, and which those words in some ultimate way express. In short, that two sentences have the same sense does not imply that there is a privileged way of expressing that sense. Indeed, in the last paragraph of paragraph 20, Wittgenstein puts off a request for just such a privileged verbal expression, with the observation that what it comes to for the two expressions to have the same sense is that they have the same use. It might be objected that this is false, and that indeed no two sentences have exactly the same use, since there will inevitably be some occasions where one would be employed but not the other. The reply to this is not simply that Wittgenstein means more or less the same. Rather, that there is no general rule what uses. So there are here two quite determinate objections to the idea meaning is use. The first one being what we previously discussed many times. Wittgenstein was no behaviorist. He did not want to replace one generalized way of watching or seeing language with another one, replacing signified and sign or intention extension with meaning is use. The second one is even stronger. What is use cannot in itself be defined. I think in my development here with this word, fondling it and trying it out and sort of sensing it, it is almost like use is a sort of physical act, going out and doing something, or having an intention of doing something. Use is nothing but simple or clear or easy to understand. This is indirectly also, one could say, and I think that is rather okay to say that the Skinnerian idea of use is nothing clear. It doesn't add anything to what we are already saying. It doesn't bring about any clarity that weren't there from the very beginning. Nothing is really added. We are in the same position. So this is reformulated by Goldfarb as following: to ascribe sameness of sense to two sentences is to say that they have features of their application in common. What features might be essential to description is not given beforehand. There are no a priori rules, or the picture needs to be dissolved. So now you get an even stronger stronger indication what the picture is. It is also the idea of preemptive rules of how things are working. And these rules sort of apply long before they are even used. And here is another clarification on the behaviorist accusation of to Wittgenstein. It should be clear that he is not, that is, a behaviorist. Then little can be made of talk of use simpliciter, given that invoking use by itself carries little information. I take his remark in paragraph 43 to be, by and large, a denial of the possibility and appropriateness of theorizing about meaning. Take a little pause there, or possibly we end it.